The honourable member for Western Arctic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to have an opportunity to speak to this amendment, although it's not the complete amendments that we were looking for in this bill, and certainly not amendments that would lead us to an ability to understand how this bill is going to impact on Canada. The bill C-33, as put forward by the Agricultural Minister and through the Agricultural Committee, is an enabling legislation that describes, gives the government power to make regulations that would open up the ability for biofuels to be used in the Canadian transportation industry across the country. And as such, really doesn't have any of the characteristics outlined that may be the most important in dealing with this issue in the future. Mr. Speaker, right across the world, concerns are mounting about the nature of the directions that countries have taken with the development of biofuels, with the promotion of ethanol from corn, from sugarcane, from soybean. These things have this movement in the world, albeit having had good intent throughout its process, has been shown and is showing a very detrimental impact on the food supply across the world, and in much scientific material showing not very much improvement in environmental characteristics regarding greenhouse gas emissions, use of agricultural land, the deforestation of land for the production of these crops has also added to the environmental concerns that people across the world are starting to recognize and to talk about. So with these amendments that I proposed, which have now been reduced to the one amendment, we felt that there was a need to have greater understanding of the direction that Canada was going to take with their biofuels policy from this House of Commons. Not simply leaving it in the hands of government to make regulations, but to have a fulsome and complete understanding in the House of Commons as to the nature of the kind of businesses that we're entering into with biofuels. So there's the nub of it, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the motions that we're putting forward here today. The motion that we're putting forward here today, we're down to the single motion, and I understand through the process of Parliament how this has happened, and I respect that, and I trust that other members will respect that we are trying very hard to understand how we can make this and ensure that this bill will work for Canadians. This bill also represents a promise of large expenditure by the government, $2 billion over a number of years towards subsidies to those that grow the product and develop the fuel that will be used in a 5% mix in gasoline across the country, as well with a significant percentage of biodiesel that will be produced. Now, Mr. Speaker, the evidence is coming in pretty strong that the greenhouse gas emissions from the development of the industry so far across the world have been less than satisfactory. If one includes the deforestation that's taken place in many countries outside of Canada that have bought into the biofuel idea, we find that actually the greenhouse gas emissions per unit of energy consumed in a person's vehicle in this biofuel mix actually turn out to be higher. And that's unfortunate. There are, as well, potentially other ways that we can go about this industry where we would see improvements in the greenhouse gas emissions. And certainly with the use of corn ethanol, we see about a 20% improvement in CO2 emissions over just conventional gas coming from farm production. But that enters into the other problem, the problem of taking up arable land right now in greater and greater quantities to produce corn for the use in ethanol production. Right now, the United States is, through its programs, has ramped up its production to 16%. Of its corn production is now turned into ethanol. They're looking at that increasing to 30%. It's caused an increase in the price of corn across the world, and this is not a healthy situation, in fact, for mankind to be moving in this direction at a time when there still is considerable poverty and malnourishment that exists right across the whole world. In Canada, the move towards 5% ethanol content in our gasoline will not be accomplished on our own land, likely. Likely, much of the feedstock for these purposes, if that's the direction that the government takes with regulation, with investment of subsidies, we'll find that much of the corn production will come from other countries, specifically the United States. So we'll be competing with the United States, with its industry, for the same product, as well as competing with people across the world who rely on it for it as a food stock in many other ways. So this is a problem. This is a problem that we need to address in Parliament. We need to talk about, we need to understand, we need to include in the bill that's being put forward here. Simply allowing this to move to regulation without considering what are the desirable characteristics, what are the directions that the government will take when it does produce those regulations is not proper government. It doesn't represent careful choice. And we saw that in the Agricultural Committee when they reviewed the bill. My colleague, who is our agricultural critic, tried manfully to put forward amendments that would allow more careful consideration of this issue. There were many witnesses that spoke on the issues, and their testimony was basically in vain. So we've come to a situation where this bill is now forward in report stage. Most of the political parties in this Parliament, one time or the other, have supported the concept of biofuels. Yet, as we move along in the world, opinion is changing rapidly. Opinion is changing about the nature of what we're creating. I had the opportunity earlier this week to have lunch with the Minister of Energy from Great Britain. And that was a topic of discussion at the luncheon when he was asked about what the European group, European Union, his own country, what their thinking was about biofuels. He said, we need to change what we're doing. When it was said, can you do this through regulation? I said, we need to have some policy that outlines the direction that we need to take with biofuels. So there's an emerging consensus across the world that however well-intentioned the move to biofuels is, the end result is not practically looking to be the way that we wanted it to be. So, best laid plans of men and mice sometimes go astray. And in the case of biofuels, I think that's quite correct. That we need to be very careful here. Canada's at an advantage right now. We haven't passed any laws. We haven't entered into the large-scale production of biofuels with any particular process, so that we can make sensible and correct choices now that can lead this country in a direction that will work. Mr. Speaker, it's imperative that we deal with this issue in Parliament. It's imperative that we understand the direction we go. It's imperative that people of Canada understand what we're doing, how we're working towards the future of this country, how we're making correct choices about our energy future. It's not good enough simply to say, okay, here's a bill, here's an enabling legislation, let's just turn it over to this government. This government hasn't won that kind of respect yet. This government hasn't demonstrated that kind of commitment to climate change, hasn't demonstrated that kind of commitment to energy security. It hasn't demonstrated those commitments that would make that kind of choice about simply turning over enabling legislation in the fashion that we're prepared to do a correct choice. So we really are caught on the horns of dilemma, Mr. Speaker. I thank you for your motion. I wasn't too sure whether we had 10 or 20 minutes, but I will. I'll leave my comments there. Very happy to engage in this debate. I think it's a debate that needs the attention of Parliament, and thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Milpick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, I think we do understand the member's concern, and that concern is out there, Mr. Speaker. I think there's no question that over the next maybe even decades, the linkage and the conflicts between food policy, energy policy, and environmental policy are going to be quite evident, and we have a responsibility globally, really to ensure that our environment's protected, that there is a good food supply there for the public as well. But my question, and so I understand his concerns. I do, however, feel we're moving in the right direction with this bill. The question I really have relates, Mr. Speaker, to the amendment itself. As I understand the bill, we do have a review process in place that basically reviews the economic, environmental impact of developing production and the ethanol policy as we move ahead. The motion really refers to, I guess, expanding the review into, as it says here, preparation and implementation of the regulations referred to in subsection 141. I wonder, could the member explain to me what they specifically mean by that amendment? Does it go beyond ethanol? Does it go to other energy areas? Just could he give us an explanation on that amendment so we know specifically what the intent of the amendment really is?
The honourable member for Western Arctic.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you refer to Section 141 and you refer to Section 141.3, I think this is the determining clause, the adverse effect from the fuel on the environment, on human life or health, on the combustion technology, or on emission control equipment. So what we have here is a process that would expand the review, would make sure that the review encompasses all the details within the bill, and would help out with that. Now this, of course, amendment is taken in absence of the other amendments that were declared out of order, and I certainly I recognize that. I will attempt in all ways to make sure that we're proceeding correctly here with the amendment, and you can take it that this amendment will, in fulsome detail, help with the review process that is outlined in the bill.
Further questions and comments? The honourable member for Westlock St. Paul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to talk a little bit about this piece of legislation and put a question forward to the honourable member and about his speech. There is different aspects of this legislation. It is very important that we recognize the diversity of this. The environment is something that we have to make sure that we take steps forward on, and that we settle down, Wayne. It's something that we have to make sure that we concentrate on. But this is also about agriculture, Mr. Speaker. This is also about making sure that we can increase the farm gate prices for our farmers by giving them more options. And one of the things that I'm really tired of seeing, Mr. Speaker, is the NDP consistently standing up for their cheap food policy in Canada. And, you know, there was an amendment put forward. In committee, we worked with the NDP member of this committee in making sure that there was a review process put in place that the NDP were happy with, that everybody around the table could accommodate to, and then we come into this place today and see them try and put restrictions on it, seeing them trying to stand in the way of enhancing agriculture for our farmers once again. And this is something, Mr. Speaker, that I'd like to know when the member is going to finally stand up and support our farmers and support putting good prices and rising commodity prices in place for them rather than cheap food policy.
The honourable member for Western Arctic.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the situation in the world speaks for itself with food prices right now. I think that's probably some of what we're having trouble with in this legislation, with the response to this legislation, is that the situation in the world is changing. And what may have been appropriate 2 years ago is changing rapidly. We want to make sure that we're making legislation here that is good for the future, not good for yesterday or even today, but that works as we move along in the future. That's the ultimate goal, I'm sure, of everyone in this House of Commons. I don't particularly think that this is a partisan issue to deal with the changing situation in the world as we speak. I think it's incumbent on all members to view very carefully what you're attempting to accomplish with this bill and put it into perspective that will work. And when we say that